Today, we will delve into a shocking case that took place in a famous residential area in Hong Kong known as Cornhill, located in the northeastern part of the island. In Tower D of this residential complex, there was a family living in apartment 312. The homeowner, Mr. Tang, 57 years old, owned a dye shop. His wife, Mrs. Ma Jieji, 58 years old, was a housewife who rarely left home. The couple had two daughters. Their eldest daughter, Pu Meiling, 27 years old, worked as a secretary for a foreign company. Their younger daughter, Pu Meiki, was married and had moved to the United States. However, she would return to Hong Kong during festivals to visit her parents. To outsiders, this family seemed like an admirable, happy household with a comfortable life. But no one could have predicted that a bizarre crime would shake their family and send shockwaves through Hong Kong. The incident began on Thursday, March 31st, 1988, around 5 p.m. A young woman and a middle-aged man arrived at the North Point police station to file a report. The young woman was 27-year-old Pu Meiling, accompanied by her lawyer. She told the police that her father, 57-year-old Mr. Pu Tang, had been missing for over a month, and she had no idea where he could be. Furthermore, her mother, Mrs. Ma Jieji, 58 years old, had confessed a month earlier that she had killed him. Recently, her mother had been acting very strangely and seemed mentally unstable, so Meiling hoped the police could uncover the truth. Meiling then provided a detailed account to the police. A month earlier, on Monday, February 22nd, she had been busy with work and returned home late that evening to their apartment, 312 in Tower D, Cornhill. When she tried to unlock the door with her key, she discovered it had been bolted from the inside. Feeling slightly confused, she thought her parents might have locked up and gone to bed, as she had come home quite late. After repeatedly ringing the doorbell and waiting, her mother finally opened the door. Meiling noticed that her mother's nose was bleeding. Before she could react, her mother sat down and started cleaning the floor with a towel, as there was a pool of blood on the ground. At the time, Meiling didn't think much of it. She assumed her mother wasn't feeling well and had experienced a nosebleed. She asked her mother, "Is Dad asleep?" But her mother didn't even look up. Instead, she kept wiping the floor and replied in a cold tone, "Your father hit me and tried to strangle me with a towel, so I hit him with a hammer and killed him." Hearing this, Meiling was taken aback. She couldn't believe her casual question had elicited such a strange response. She dismissed it as her mother being upset and saying something out of anger, as she couldn't imagine her mother harming anyone. Meiling decided to go to her father's room to ask what had happened between her parents. As she approached the master bedroom, her mother shouted and forbade her from entering. Startled by her mother's outburst and exhausted from working overtime, Meiling didn't press the matter further. She retreated to her own room instead. In the following days, Meiling continued her routine, going to work as usual. Apart from not seeing her father, there was nothing unusual. Preoccupied with her busy schedule, she nearly forgot the events of that night. After some time, her mother told her, "I want to move." As a result, the family moved from Cornhill to Shantou Street in the Wan Chai district, a distance of about 2.8 miles. After settling into their new home, Meiling still did not see her father. Fearing her mother's reaction, she avoided asking any questions. This indifferent attitude was not new for Meiling. Her family had long been accustomed to moving frequently. She recounted that her mother often insisted their house was haunted, resulting in 4 moves within just 5 years. In recent years, her parents' relationship had deteriorated, and arguments became frequent. Meiling thought that her father's absence could be because he had gone out to relax, or possibly gone to see the mistress her mother had previously mentioned. As time passed, there was still no sign of her father. She received a call from her uncle, her father's elder brother, with whom he co-owned the dye shop. Her uncle said, "Your father hasn't been to the shop in a long time." This prompted Meiling to search for her father by calling and visiting places he might frequent, but she couldn't find him anywhere. Suddenly, she recalled her mother's previous statement about killing him and started to suspect it might be true. She shared her concerns with her uncle. After hearing the story, her uncle broke into a cold sweat, sensing something was seriously wrong, and urged her to call the police. However, Mei Ling hesitated. Instead, she wanted to uncover where her father had gone and whether her mother had truly harmed him. Later, she discovered a handwritten letter in her mother's safe. The letter had been written before her father's disappearance. In it, her mother described the unfair treatment she had endured at her father's hands. She complained about the pain she had suffered and expressed her desire for proper compensation. She wrote that since their marriage in May 1959, she had given birth to 2 daughters. While she hadn't contributed financially, she had dedicated herself to caring for the family. However, she was devastated to learn that her husband had been unfaithful for over 15 years, engaging in multiple extramarital affairs and even fathering an illegitimate son. The letter further stated that her husband had abandoned her emotionally for more than 15 years, and they no longer lived as a married couple. She described enduring harsh treatment in both household and financial matters. Despite repeatedly asking him to treat her fairly, he had threatened to kill her. She had borne this mistreatment for years, living in constant fear that one day he might lose his temper and actually carry out his threats. Feeling utterly hopeless, she wrote that no one could resolve the injustices she felt inside. After reading the letter, Mei Ling became convinced that her father's disappearance was highly suspicious and likely connected to her mother. She decided to call the police. On March 31st, 1988, more than a month after her father's disappearance, Mei Ling found herself overwhelmed by the situation. The emotional weight of it all left her deeply anxious. She sought advice from a lawyer who agreed to accompany her to the police station. At the station, through tears, Mei Ling recounted the entire story. Because the case involved human life, the police handed it over to the Serious Crimes Unit for investigation after hearing the report. They paid close attention to Mei Ling's account. After all, there was no plausible reason for an adult man with a legitimate business to suddenly abandon his assets and vanish without explanation. Moreover, his wife had confessed to killing him, making Mrs. Gigi the prime suspect. On the morning of April 1st, 1988, investigators from the crime unit visited Mrs. Gigi's residence on Shantou Street, Wan Chai District. Ma Jieji was a thin, middle-aged woman who appeared to be mentally unstable. During the police investigation, she locked herself in the bathroom. She refused to turn on the lights, eat, or come out. After a lengthy period of persuasion by the police, she finally left the bathroom. A patient female officer conducted the interrogation, and eventually Mrs. Gigi began to speak, revealing a shocking secret. As for the suspect, Ma Jieji was born in Guangzhou in 1930 into a large family with many siblings. Her family was extremely poor. Like many young people of her time, she ventured to Hong Kong alone to make a living. After arriving in Hong Kong, she met Mr. Tang, a local resident who was 1 year younger than her. They grew close and eventually developed a romantic relationship. Jieji believed that Tang was an honest man with no gambling habits, someone she could entrust with her future. In May 1959, 29-year-old Jieji married 28-year-old Tang. A year later, in 1960, their first daughter, Mei Ling, was born. From the outside, the family appeared happy with the arrival of their daughter, but the reality was far from it. After giving birth, Jieji's health began to deteriorate, and she frequently fell ill. Her husband, Tang, showed no concern for her well-being and instead spent his nights out. Whenever Jieji questioned him, he offered excuses such as playing mahjong with friends and staying out too late to return home. Over time, their younger daughter, Meiki, was born. By then, Tang's attitude toward his wife had worsened significantly. The couple often argued or maintained a cold silence. Their marriage became more of a cohabitation without any emotional connection. Whenever Jieji was beaten, she vented her frustrations on her 2 daughters, blaming them for her husband's indifference after giving birth to them. In Hong Kong, Ma Jieji had no one else to rely on. Her husband was her sole source of support. Despite his many flaws, she accepted this life and was unwilling to make any changes. Over the next 25 years, her 2 daughters grew up. Her youngest daughter, Meiki, married early and moved to the United States with her husband. This left only 3 family members living together, moving from place to place until they eventually settled in apartment 312 of Tower D Cornhill Garden. Since 1982, Jieji's mental health had steadily declined. She became aware of her husband's infidelity and felt abandoned and mistreated by him. Although she once placed her faith in Buddhism, she eventually felt that Buddha had ignored her prayers and caused her life to spiral out of control. From that point on, she stopped lighting incense, losing her last source of spiritual support. Jieji was a kind-hearted housewife who disliked going out and devoted herself entirely to taking care of her family. She had no close friends and no outlet for her emotions, so she kept her deepest feelings bottled up. Over time, her personality changed. She became increasingly withdrawn, distancing herself from family and friends. When encountering neighbors while out for a walk, she avoided greetings and never revealed her real name. She even told her daughters that she constantly heard strange noises near her ears and was convinced that monsters or ghosts were inhabiting their home. Because of these beliefs, the family moved 4 times between 1982 and 1987. Additionally, she often warned her elder daughter never to share their phone number or address with anyone. However, her strange behavior failed to capture her husband's attention. Her elder daughter recalled that her mother's constant suspicion of everything severely affected the harmony within the family. Gradually, even she became less concerned about her mother. As for her father, he developed a deep resentment toward Jieji, believing she had failed to give him a son to carry on his legacy. Consequently, in his 30s, he began an affair and fathered a son with his mistress. He secretly moved his mistress and son into the attic of his dye shop. When Jieji discovered this, she was furious and confronted her husband, asking why he had treated her this way. He refused to explain and insisted on divorcing her, wanting to make his mistress his legal wife. Their marriage reached a deadlock. With no income of her own, Jieji was entirely dependent on others and unwilling to give up her marriage without securing a financial settlement. She adamantly resisted the idea of divorce, as they couldn't reach an agreement on finances. From then on, the couple completely turned their backs on each other. Later, Tang sold one of his properties, earning 200,000 Hong Kong dollars. On February 22, 1988, the day of the incident, Jieji grew anxious that her husband would use the 200,000 Hong Kong dollars to support his mistress and illegitimate son. She demanded the money and insisted that he cut off all contact with them. Enraged by her demands, Tang felt she was being unreasonably troublesome and, in his anger, struck her on the head with a hammer. Unable to hold back any longer, Jieji grabbed another hammer left behind by a decorator and fought back. During the struggle, the hammer struck Tang on the head, causing him to collapse to the floor unconscious and eventually die. When she realized her husband was dead, she was overcome with fear. Instead of calling the police to confess, she decided to destroy all evidence and erase any traces of the crime. After thinking it over, Mrs. Jieji concluded that disposing of the body as it was would be too risky, as someone might discover it. She decided to dismember her husband's body. She called a part-time housekeeper who occasionally came to clean her home and asked her to buy a power saw. Her plan was to use the saw to cut up the body. However, she had never used one before. Upon trying it, she found that the power saw made loud noises and caused high-frequency vibrations, scattering debris everywhere. Realizing this might draw attention, she abandoned the power saw and switched to a handsaw. Although using a handsaw required more effort, it was much quieter and less likely to raise suspicion among her neighbors. After finishing the dismemberment, she looked at the body parts and sighed, murmuring, "If you hadn't pushed me again and again, it wouldn't have come to this." She then contemplated what to do with the remains. Directly discarding them would risk immediate discovery, so she decided to process them first. She placed some parts in a large steamer to cook them, aiming to prevent decomposition, odors, and blood leakage. Once cooked, she packed the body parts, including bones and flesh, into several trash bags. She then disposed of the bags in different garbage bins around the residential area. The police were horrified when they heard her recount the process. They couldn't believe that the frail, elderly woman standing before them could have brutally attacked her husband, let alone dismembered and cooked his body all by herself. The investigators doubted her story, suspecting that she might have imagined the events or had someone else carry out the acts for her. The biggest issue with the case was that by the time the police arrested Ma Jieji, over a month had passed since the crime occurred. The body parts she claimed to have thrown into garbage bins had long been taken to landfill sites and were irretrievable, leaving her confession as the sole piece of evidence. Furthermore, her mental state was highly unstable, making it difficult to distinguish between truth and delusion. There was also the possibility that she had imagined parts of the story. However, as the investigation progressed, the police began to believe that her confession was indeed truthful. They visited the crime scene at apartment 312 in Tower D, Cornhill. The apartment was completely empty, with not a single proper piece of furniture remaining. No human remains, dental tissue, personal belongings, or documents belonging to the victim were found. The entire apartment appeared spotless, with no visible bloodstains, giving no indication that a murder had occurred there. Although Jieji had claimed to have used a power saw, which scattered evidence all over the rooms, the scene was remarkably clean. In her confession, she mentioned that after dismembering the body, blood had splattered on the wardrobe, curtains, walls, corners, and even the ceiling. She said she immediately cleaned the bloodstains, but couldn't remove all traces from the mattress. To cover the stains on the mattress and bedding, she contacted a part-time housekeeper and asked her to purchase black ink, which she used to mask the blood. She then called movers to dispose of all the kitchen tools, hammers, the power saw, and the handsaw. Most of the household items were either sold or discarded, leaving only 2 wardrobes, which she had moved to her new residence on Shantou Street. The police inspected the 2 wardrobes at her new residence and found some traces of blood that were invisible to the naked eye. Additionally, a small amount of human tissue was discovered in the drainage pipes of the kitchen at Cornhill Garden. At that time, however, Hong Kong did not have DNA technology, so it was impossible to confirm definitively whether the samples belonged to Pu Tang. Still, blood type testing revealed that the samples matched the victim's blood type. This evidence, however, was insufficient to prove her guilt. While the police struggled to piece together the case, they received a surprising confession call. The caller, a man named Ma Xiankun, identified himself as Jieji's younger brother. He admitted to the police that, prior to the crime, his sister had approached him for help. According to Xiankun, his sister had told him, "Your brother-in-law sold a property for 200,000 Hong Kong dollars and plans to give the money to his mistress and illegitimate child. I need you to help me get that money back, and I'll pay 8,000 Hong Kong dollars to each person involved." She also asked him to find 2 people to pose as kidnappers and go to the Cornhill apartment to tie up both her and her husband. Their task would be to threaten her husband into handing over the 200,000 Hong Kong dollars while she played along and used the opportunity to give him sleeping pills. On February 21st, 1988, one day before the incident, Ma Xiankun, Jieji's younger brother, hired 2 construction workers, Liang Jiezhong and Shi Jiming. The 3 men pretended to be robbers, as planned, and went to apartment 312. They tied Pu Tang to the bed in the bedroom, covering his mouth and eyes with tape. They then threatened him, demanding 200,000 Hong Kong dollars, but he firmly refused to comply. With no other choice, the 3 men left. Before leaving, Ma Xiankun warned his brother-in-law, "You'd better stop playing around with women." After they departed, only the couple remained in the house. Early the next morning, February 22nd, 1988, the day of the incident, Jieji called her younger brother and his accomplices again, saying, "He escaped. Come back and tie him up again." When the 3 men returned, they found Pu Tang had indeed freed himself but was lying on the floor unconscious. They helped him up, tied him securely, and placed him back on the bed. Ma Xiankun claimed that after completing their task, the 3 of them left and had no knowledge of what happened afterward. When asked why he confessed to the police, Ma Xiankun admitted that after reading news reports about Pu Tang's murder, he decided to explain his involvement to avoid being implicated later. At this point, the police realized that Jieji had not been entirely truthful in her confession. It seemed likely that she had withheld details to protect her younger brother. There was even a possibility that Ma Xiankun could have been the killer. The police devised a strategy to get Jieji to reveal the full story. The three suspects, Ma Jiankun, Liang Jiezhong, and Shi Jiming, were brought into the same interrogation room. Later, the police brought Jieji into the room and showed her the three men being escorted by officers. They told her that her brother, Ma Xiankun, had confessed. Immediately, Jieji responded, "The entire incident is my fault. While I hired them to tie up Tang, I am the only one who killed him. The others had nothing to do with it." She then provided a complete confession. Her account matched what Ma Xiankun had said. On the day of the incident, after the three men left the apartment, Jieji prepared a bowl of porridge for her husband. When she brought it to him by the bed and tried to feed him, she discovered that he had freed himself. At that point, Tang realized the entire ordeal had been orchestrated by his wife. Furious, he got up, grabbed the bowl of porridge from her hands, and threw it at her. Shouting in anger, Jieji retaliated by grabbing a large hammer and striking her husband forcefully, killing him instantly. After her arrest, the police sent Ma Jieji to a psychiatric hospital for evaluation. The psychiatrist diagnosed her with paranoid delusions and schizophrenia. Based on her history, it was likely she had suffered from the condition for over 25 years. Individuals with this disorder often feel they are being persecuted. It's possible she acted preemptively to protect herself, believing that killing her husband was the only way to ensure her own safety. On September 29, 1988, 6 months after the incident, the case went to trial at Hong Kong's High Court. 7 jurors participated in the trial. Ma Jieji faced 3 charges: murder, unlawful detention, and preventing the lawful burial of a body. The 3 accomplices were only charged with unlawful detention. During the trial, all 3 accomplices admitted to their crimes. However, Ma Jieji retracted her earlier confession and pleaded not guilty. The defense attorney presented a handwritten letter by the defendant, Ma Jieji, as evidence in court. The letter stated that Tang intended to kill her and pampered his mistress, leaving her terrified of being harmed by him. Furthermore, Jieji suffered from paranoid delusions and schizophrenia, conditions that made her prone to hallucinations and false memories that she believed were real. As a result, her earlier confession was deemed unreliable, and the description of the murder she provided was argued to be meaningless. Additionally, the police failed to recover any physical evidence of Tang's death, such as hair, bones, or body parts. The defense argued that Jieji was completely innocent. Based on the handwritten letter and Jieji's mental state, the presiding judge believed that at the time of the incident, Jieji was not in a sound mental state and was unable to fully control her actions. Therefore, the possibility that she acted in self-defense could not be ruled out. After a week-long trial on October 4, 1988, the jury delivered a mixed opinion. For a guilty verdict, only a majority of jurors needed to agree, while a unanimous decision was required for acquittal. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury reached a conclusion with a 5-2 vote. Ma Jieji was not guilty of murder. However, she was convicted of manslaughter. Considering her long-standing mental illness, the court ruled that she be detained indefinitely at the Shaolin Psychiatric Treatment Center. The Shaolin Psychiatric Treatment Center is not a regular hospital, but a high-security facility in Hong Kong. It is operated under the Correctional Services Department and is used to house male and female inmates requiring psychiatric monitoring, treatment, and assessment, as well as specific psychological services for those awaiting trial or detention. Ma Jieji was ordered to remain in the facility indefinitely until she recovered. 3 days later, on October 7, 1988, the other 3 defendants, Ma Xiankun, Liang Jiezhong, and Shi Jiming, were convicted of unlawful detention. They were sentenced to 2 years in prison and 2 years of probation. The judge remarked that this was a highly unusual case and a family tragedy. Jieji had sought the help of the defendants because she could no longer endure her husband's infidelity and abusive behavior. However, the 3 defendants only went to the apartment to tie up the victim and stage a fake robbery, which ultimately failed. They did not carry any weapons, indicating that they were not professional criminals and were unlikely to reoffend in the future. As a result, the 3 defendants were given lenient sentences and were detained by the police for only 2.5 months. The sentences were approved, and the defendants were granted probation and released immediately in court. Thus, the case came to a close. Majieji spent 7 years undergoing treatment in a psychiatric hospital. One day, her psychiatrist determined that she had fully recovered and was fit for release. She was set free at the end of 1995. This case became known as one of the top 10 most mysterious cases in Hong Kong, and it was the first in Hong Kong's history where a defendant was convicted without the victim's body ever being found. The story of their family was described by the media, the public, and superstitious individuals as one of the most haunted apartments in Hong Kong for many years. 2 years after the incident, the apartment was sold to an investor for over 1,100,000 Hong Kong dollars. The investor immediately listed it for resale to make a profit, but no buyers were willing to take over the property. The apartment was subsequently rented out, primarily to foreign tenants. The property owner attempted to auction the apartment in both 1990 and 2000, but the auctions were unsuccessful. The real estate values of neighboring units in the same building were also negatively impacted by the infamous case. Parts of the case were adapted into films and books, including the 1992 TV drama Hong Kong Criminal produced by Asia Television. Over time, the case gradually faded from public memory. After her release, Ma Jieji disappeared, and her whereabouts remain unknown. Any further details of the case may only be known to her. That concludes today's video. See you in the next one. Goodbye.